Hello all. I saw there was a bit of fuss recently on social media about young people today not knowing who Alfred the Great is. And of course, you wouldn't really expect many of the modern UK denizens to know who Alfred the Great is anyway. I mean, they're all part of the Blairite Revolution, remember? Everything is in the future now. The past is bigoted and evil. We need to resign it to the dustbin of history. Of course, the reason why the powers that be don't like us to look back to the past is because the past has a narrative about what England and Britain is, which challenges the ideas of liberal modernity. Of course, Alfred the Great was the father of England. He united the Anglo-Saxons and laid the foundations for a unified political England down the line. Not to mention, he promoted Christian culture and is essentially the spiritual father of our lands. Now, as an Englishman myself, I find it quite moving to think back to Alfred. After all, it's a pretty much unbroken chain of royals, all the way back well over 1,000 years, despite a quick blip in the interregnum with Oliver Cromwell. And I think there's a reason why the British, the English in particular, have been very fond of the royal family. And I think because it represents something very key about the Anglo identity. That would be something like a conservative nature rooted in tradition above all else. Of course, that was deeply challenged by the Blairite Revolution, usurped even. England isn't revolutionary socialist. Yes, it's got a socialist tradition, but it's never been a socialist country. Similarly, it's never been a fascist country either. Conservative, right-wing, yes, but not fascist and not revolutionary. I think this energy found fruition in Edmund Burke above all else, the idea that we're gifted a civilization, and yes, change is part of life, but that change has to be measured rather than revolutionary. We have to stick close to our institutions, ensure that they remain steady in the chaos of the world to give us poise, balance and wisdom. I think this is why Queen Elizabeth II was so popular. She represented something about stability in an age of chaos. Now, personally, I'm quite ambivalent towards her, but I can see why people respect her. Prime ministers come and go, but Elizabeth was always there as a representative of who we are, quiet and steady. Again, I'm ambivalent because basically she oversaw the corrosion of our culture and mass immigration into our lands and didn't say anything, but that's a video for another time. Now, the reason I'm saying all of this is to try and emphasise that the institutions of the nation, specifically the royal family, weren't created so much as arbitrary power structures to oppress the people as our leftist friends may wish to tell us, but they were more symbolic representations of something that existed in the Anglo soul. We could say it's something like the crystallization of tradition and order, and if we follow the law and have a sort of high trust organization, then we create a gentleness and a stability which we all enjoy. We can reflect on this via George Orwell's words in his essay England, Your England. The gentleness of the English civilization is perhaps its most marked characteristic. You notice it the instant you set foot on English soil. It is a land where the bus conductors are good-tempered and the policemen carry no revolvers. In no country inhabited by white men is it easier to shove people off the pavement. And with this goes something that is always written off by European observers as decadence or hypocrisy, the English hatred of war and militarism. The idea that the English despise brutalism and war may run counter to modernist liberalism, which paints us as evil, brutal colonisers. Look at the British Empire. However, it could be argued at the same time that the British Empire actively civilised the world by trying to implement the same traditional structures in the places they went that created long-term stable nations. Now, it's quite telling that those structures saw some success in certain countries, such as Singapore and Hong Kong and so on, and not in others. However, the point is, it's these traditional structures which made England gentle. As I say, if you can hold on to who and what you are, your very soul, through the institutions which represent that, you will create a harmonious nation. Towards the end of his essay, Orwell prophesies that we'll only see the end of this English gentleness, this English structure, if we see some, quote, great disaster. He states, the intellectuals who hope to see England Russianized or Germanized will be disappointed. The gentleness, the hypocrisy, the thoughtlessness, the reverence for law and the hatred of uniforms will remain, along with the suet puddings and the misty skies. It needs some very great disaster, such as prolonged subjugation by a foreign enemy, to destroy a national culture. Yet when we look at the state of the institutions of the country, have we not seen a great disaster now? It didn't come from military conquest, as Orwell said it might, but instead we were usurped from the inside. First of all, we saw an ideological subversion, the removal away from our tradition, the denial of our very soul, and the replication of the present ideology of the age, modern and robotic in its energy. And then on top of that, we've had the mass importation of people from the third world. After all, what's the difference between somebody from Timbuktu and somebody from Nottingham in the modernist ideology? None at all, unless you're some sort of bigot. We can all see some sort of takeover has happened, whether it's the long march through the institutions, money power taking over the Western world. However we frame it, it's clear we've lost our tradition and we're losing touch with our very soul. And now we can see that our beloved institutions are like a dog with rabies, a beloved dog that's now been ripped apart by something new and foreign, and it's turned these once wonderful hosts of our soul nature against us. Of course, I speak about the central institutions such as government, the Anglican Church, and perhaps most famously, the royal family. Here on your screen is King Charles opening a new Islamic centre in Oxford, and you can see he's doing so quite gleefully, globalist liberal that he is. But what would King Alfred make of this father of our nation, he who laid down the foundations for what we were for 1,000 years plus? Is this not a complete takeover, a complete betrayal of everything Alfred was, of everything England is? It's worth remembering here that the royal family gets its support via the patriotic people of the country who sense something of their own soul in it. But if they start to see that this very institution, which is supposed to represent them, has turned against them, what point is the institution any longer? Now, to be clear, I'm pro the royal family as an institution, but not one that's turned against our interests and actively works against the nation and the people. What is the point in such an institution? And this makes me think, all throughout our history we've had changes of the royal houses. Why can't we push for such a thing in this day and age? Now again, I have to say this because we're in Starmer's Britain. I'm not calling for armed insurrection to dethrone King Charles. I'm saying, why can't we start thinking differently? Why be loyal to an institution which actively works against us, which actively dislikes us, which will try and represent the very people and things, the very liberal system which would undermine it, which would see it destroyed? It's exactly the same as the Anglican Church. In essence, King Charles's cozying up to Islam is another microcosmic act of his whole reign. He's no longer representing the soul of the Anglo, exactly what his role is supposed to be. He's actively turned against that. Now, again, I'm not saying we should have some armed insurrection and march down Whitehall. I'm saying, why bother supporting this institution anymore? Why not look to a new king? We're coming into a new era. Why not think about democratic means in which we can think about people we would want to represent this nation? After all, as the old Anglo legend states, King Arthur will return, Excalibur in hand, in Britain's darkest hour of need. If new times are upon us and great changes inevitably coming, why not start thinking differently too? These are just some of my thoughts anyway. Do let me know what you think about all this down below. Do consider subscribing to the channel if you're new.